On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 213. The Build Back Better bill is passed.
All right, guys, so we have some news out of Congress as the Democrats have passed their almost $2 trillion Build Back Better social spending agenda despite the $365 billion deficit warning from the CBO. Now, there are some moderate Democrats that have been holding out their votes, right, until they get more information about how much this bill is actually going to cost from the Congressional Budget Office. And despite the Biden administration saying that this bill would in fact cost nothing, it actually does cost something, as again, over 10 years, right? This bill is going to generate $365 billion in deficits, okay? So despite the fact this bill is going to cost taxpayers, right, and it is going to generate a deficit according to the Congressional Budget Office, Jen Psaki came out here today and still doubled down on the narrative that this bill is going to cost nothing. Take a look.
The president going to stop saying that the Build Back Better plan does not increase the deficit 1 single cent if we now know that that is not true?
It is true, and I would note the several economists and experts out there. I think you're probably talking about the CBO score,
which Joe Biden himself in 2010 called the gold standard for Democrats and Republicans.
Well, Peter, since we're all here to communicate with the public about accurate information, what I would just note is that one of the components that experts, Democrats and Republicans, including former heads of the CBO, have pointed to is that IRS enforcement is not something that there's a lot of experience in the CBO scoring. They still scored it, but is undervalued by the assessment of many economists and experts, including people who have been critical of us in the past, who estimate, including former Treasury secretaries of both parties, who estimate there will be significant savings, significantly higher than what is estimated currently. So our assessment and the assessment by many economists out there is that there will be savings over 10 years that will actually reduce the deficit.
All right, guys, so Jen Psaki essentially is saying that, well, you know, the CBO didn't include the revenue that the IRS is expected to collect from increased tax enforcement, as there's a provision in this bill to have the IRS hire, I think, like 80-some thousand more agents in order to collect more money from the American people, us, right, to do more audits. Okay, so she's saying that, well, you know, that's not factored into this yet. So therefore, it's still not going to cost anything. But I believe that even with that enforcement, that tax enforcement, it's still going to result in a deficit, as the proposal to spend an additional $80 billion on IRS enforcement would raise $270 billion for a net gain of $137 billion over the decade. So if you add that $127 billion to the deficit of $365 billion, I mean, we're still looking at about $240 billion in deficits that this bill would create, even with that estimate. So essentially at this point, Jen Psaki is lying, right? She's lying and she's making claims with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. But regardless, let's actually read about this bill, and then I'm going to tell you guys what I expect to happen in regards to whether or not this will actually pass the Senate. House Democrats nearly passed President Biden's nearly $2 trillion social spending bill Friday over unified Republican opposition, and despite an official warning that it could add more than $350 billion to the nation's deficit, the 220 to 213 vote followed months of negotiations within the Democrat Party that cut the cost of Biden's mammoth Build Back Better Act in half and multiple delays to win support from both moderate and progressive wings of the party. All right, so this is important because the progressives signaled that if they didn't get all the spending that they wanted, right? I think they said that they wanted $6+ trillion, okay? And they tried to make the argument that $3 trillion, $3.5 trillion, which is what they claim is a compromise for them. They said, you know what? We're not going lower than that, right? However, they had to go lower than that because Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema said, hey, we're not getting on board with that. So they ultimately settled with 1.75 trillion, and there are going to be a lot of progressives that are going to be pissed off about this because they're going to say that this is not enough, right? And despite progressives being pissed off with this, they still decided to fall in line and vote for it. Democratic lawmakers cheered and chanted Build Back Better in the chamber after the bill reached the 218 vote threshold needed for passage. Representative Kat Menkat summed up the GOP's feelings by referring to the bill as Build Back Broke and telling Democrats good luck in the Senate while announcing the vote of one of her Republican colleagues as a proxy. Kanik's remarks was met with cheers from GOP lawmakers and boos from the other side of the aisle, with one Democrat shouting, "You're an embarrassment," across the chamber. White House Deputy Secretary Andrew Bates celebrated the House vote by tweeting, "Let's go BBB," branded in an attempt to repurpose the phrase that has been used by many Republicans as a stand-in for a more profane anti-Biden slogan. Bates' post was mocked by those on the right. Official Biden White House statement from Andrew Bates. F. Joe Biden tweeted Steve Guest, Special Communications Advisor for Senator Ted Cruz. "I know the dysfunction in the admin is bad, and I know Biden's approval rating is catering, but this is next level." The cost of the bill has been subject to a fierce debate. The Congressional Budget Office put the measure's 10-year price tag at $1.68 trillion, while Democrats have cited a figure of $1.85 trillion. However, independent analysis have pegged the true cost of the measure at close to $5 trillion if temporary programs and tax credits are extended through 2031. The nonpartisan Penn-Wharton budget model estimated earlier this month that the plan would increase spending by $1.87 trillion, but it would cost $3.9 trillion over the next decade if new spending programs laid out in the bill were made permanent. All right, guys, so this is important because this is kind of like a Trojan horse. Right, the Democrats are basically saying, "Listen, guys, we've negotiated the bill down to 1.75 trillion. Right, not that much. Okay, according to them, even though, again, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of how much money, the government usually spends, this is a ton, right? But compared to how much we've been spending over the last year, it ain't out of the ordinary. Again, considering how much we spent over the last year, which has been $5 to $6+ trillion that we really don't have. However, again, the Democrats know that once these spending programs are enacted, it's going to be hard to get people off the government teat, right? For example, the expanded child tax credit, which is basically UBI for parents that have kids, it's going to be very, very hard to vote against keeping that program, right? It's going to be very, very hard for Republicans to go out here and to tell people that, hey, you know what, we're going to cut off your child tax credit that people are getting every single month. And that is the toxicity of these bills that the Democrats passed, right? Because they made the programs temporary to lower the upfront cost. However, they know that in the future, once these programs come back up for debate in regards to extension, it's going to be hard politically for Republicans to say no, right? So that's really what the issue is here that the Republicans will be facing in regards to this bill. Once people get hooked on the government teat, it's really hard to get them off. Hours before the vote, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy delayed Speaker Nancy Pelosi's plans to bring the bill to the floor Thursday evening by using his magic minute to conduct a record-breaking 8-hour and 33-minute full speech blasting the measure in addition to other progressive policies. Only Representative Jared Golden, Democrat from Maine, broke ranks to side with the GOP in a closely divided House where Pelosi could afford just 3 Democratic defections and still get the bill passed. Biden's signature spending plan faces an uncertain future in the evenly split Senate, where 2 moderate Democrats, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, have repeatedly objected to various provisions and demanded it would not add to the country's crushing debt burden. All right, so that's the key here, guys. What's going to happen in the Senate? Right, so because it's not that surprising that it passed in the House. However, the Senate is where it's really going to be tested because Joe Manchin has come out here and talked about inflation, talked about adding to the debt, how bad it is, that we shouldn't be doing this. And when it comes time to vote in the Senate, you best believe there's going to be a lot of pressure on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to get this done. Right, it's going to be a lot of pressure on them to pass this bill. And what I would expect, guys, is that there's probably going to be a Senate version of this bill that is going to be different than the House version, which means that there is going to be a revote in the House. So this thing is not really over yet, right? It seems like Biden's almost at the finish line, but I really don't think so, right? I think that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are going to find a way to reject this bill and change it in a way that progressives are not going to want to accept in the House and force them to vote on it again. That's my prediction. However, they could fold. And if they do fold, that's really going to make Mitch McConnell look bad, right, with the base, because a lot of people have criticized him for basically allowing this to happen in the first place, right? Biden already got a W for his administration in regards to the bipartisan infrastructure package, right, that McConnell signed up for. So if Biden also ends up getting this as well, a lot of people are going to be pointing the fingers at him as the person that allowed this to happen. So, I think that, the battle's not over yet, but a lot of this is going to be determined by what Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema do. But as of right now, what we do know is that this bill will, in fact, add to the deficit, despite what the Democrats say. And if this thing actually does pass, it could be one of those things that helps revive their chances of winning in 2022, as it looks like it's going to be a GOP blowout. But I just find it amazing how all of a sudden the Democrats got their stuff together in regards to being able to actually, legislate after the whole Virginia debacle, right? It just shows how desperate they are to regain a good standing with the American people, right? So, we will see what happens here moving forward. But as of right now, this thing is headed to the Senate. We will see if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema stick to their guns in regards to not adding to the deficit. Then, if I had to guess, there'll probably be a different version of the bill that will lead to another House vote, ultimately, which will keep this thing carried on for another month or two. That's just my guess. However, I could be wrong about that. But regardless, like I said, if Biden's agenda does end up getting passed, this is going to be a very, very bad look for Mitch McConnell. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.